This week's episode of the ArtTactic Podcast is brought to you by ArtTactic. The Frieze London auctions have just concluded, and we have you covered on ArtTactic.com as we break down the sales, looking at all of the data with a variety of reports, including our resale analysis report, our auction analysis report, and our snapshot reports. We're offering 15% off these reports to our ArtTactic Podcast listeners by entering the promo code PODCAST15 when checking out. Thanks for listening to the ArtTactic Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Green. Recently, the art world's attention turned to Europe with two major back-to-back fairs, Frieze London and Art Basel Paris. The buzz this year was especially palpable around Art Basel Paris, perhaps the most anticipated art fair I've seen in recent years. It marked the first time Basel was held in the newly renovated Grand Palais, and to add to the excitement, many galleries that have expanded to Paris in recent years hosted remarkable exhibitions that coincided with the fair. And of course, it's Paris. What's not to love? In this week's episode of the podcast, we're joined by Nate Freeman, culture columnist for Vanity Fair and author of the True Colors newsletter, as we recap all the highlights from Art Basel Paris. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much for listening. Nate, it's so great having you back on the podcast. Thanks so much for chatting with us.
Adam, so glad to be back on the podcast. Love coming on.
Absolutely. So first, I have to say, you wrote a fantastic article in Vanity Fair recapping everything that happened in Paris during Art Basel. If our listeners haven't checked that out yet, I definitely recommend they do. So even the week before Art Basel Paris, when I was in London for Frieze, there was just so much buzz about Paris. Now that you've had time to reflect, what's your overall takeaway from the event? Did it live up to the high expectations?
Well, I think the expectations were very high because Art Basel set them very high. You know, for the last few years, the fair has been in a temporary space while Art Basel kept on saying, just you wait. The Grand Palais is going to be here in a few years. It's going to be amazing. And then they changed the name from Paris Plus Art Basel, which is the convoluted name, to just Art Basel Paris, signaling that this was a major Art Basel fair. So the expectations were high because they were set high, and the dealers were told that this was going to be an incredible fair. And then the expectations were met, I think. You know, the buzz in Paris was deafening, right? You could hear it in London. People in London were excited to get to Paris. People skipped London in order just to do Paris. And, you know, despite all this enormous hype, it actually did pull it off. I mean, you know, this was a major art fair where the dealers brought very serious works for real collectors, a real cut above the sort of quality level that you see at Art Basel Miami Beach, for instance. But at the same time, you had excitement, you had buzz, you had flashy parties, you had big dinners, you know, you had a ton of people in from out of town. So you had this combination of a really high quality art fair where people are transacting at the highest level, which usually is reserved just for Art Basel in Switzerland. But you also had the, you know, incredible city of Paris, populated by, you know, people in from out of town, people from all over Europe. And it really combined to create a really exciting week in the art world.
Yeah, and as you alluded to, it really seemed like Paris became an art hub during the fair with events happening all over the city. And I know you covered that in depth in your article. What were some of the standout exhibitions and even events beyond the fair itself?
There was just so many. I mean, Paris has become this incredible culture hub just really in the last 10, 15 years. Obviously, Paris has always been, you know, a home to artists, to patrons of the arts. It has some of the greatest museums in the world. But in the last, you know, decade plus, you've seen, you know, arts patrons who have made their fortunes in Paris through the luxury business, open private museums that have some of the best exhibitions of anywhere in Europe. And I'm talking about the Fondation Louis Vuitton, which was founded by Bernard Arnault, and the Bourse de Commerce, which was founded by Francois Pinault. And these are relatively new museums in a city that has had some of the best museums in the world for centuries. And so it just adds so much more to what is already such a rich cultural city. And at the Fondation Louis Vuitton, there was a show that I think was one of the best museum shows in town. It was a retrospective of the American artist Tom Wesselmann, and there was over 100 incredible artworks by Wesselmann, many of which came from the foundation. But there were also works by his contemporaries and also by contemporary artists who made work in response to Wesselmann. And this is an artist, a pop artist who is truly a master of the pop form, but hasn't really gotten the attention that I think, or a lot of people think, he deserves. So to see a very serious institution like the Fondation Louis Vuitton put on a show like that was really deeply exciting. Another show that really took me by surprise, though, was the Tina Barney show at the Jeu de Paume. This is an artist, American artist who I think hasn't fully gotten her due in America. Just with a stunning installation of work at, an incredible jewel box institution right on the Seine, and I think that really blew people away. I also love the surrealism show at the Pompidou, but it was just way too crowded. I couldn't move through there. It was insanely crowded. I mean, they had to do some crowd control or something because I could barely see the works, but it was a good show. And another thing that's happened in Paris over the last less than 10 years is the gallery scene, which, has always been somewhat present, very local, has become deeply international. And part of that is because of Brexit. I think that a lot of these mega galleries thought they needed a real flag planted on continental Europe post Brexit. That's when you had David Zwirner open their gallery, and that's when you had Hauser and Wirth open their gallery in Paris. Of course, Larry Gosselin has had a gallery in Paris for a long time. He opened another gallery in Paris, in addition to the hangar-like space he has near the private jet airport in Le Bourget. And you saw those galleries bring really great shows this year. They did not slouch at all. I mean, Gagosian brought an incredible painting show by Harold Enkart. The David Zwirner Gallery had a truly remarkable gallery show of work by Dana Schutz. And Hauser and Wirth had a wonderful Rashid Johnson show that I think was one of the hottest shows in town in terms of who was trying to buy them. Plus, you had like a wonderful surprise like the Sturdivant show at today's Ropash, which was easily the most Instagram show of the week, and it really just a joy to have there. So, as you can see, a ton going down in Paris.
Yeah, it's really remarkable just how much is going on in Paris. So as we all know, there's been a lot of coverage in the media lately about the state of the art market. So given the current market, how were the reported sales at the fair this year? And also, how was the quality of the work at the fair? I think that's an important nuance because quality is especially important in this market and I think can dictate how sales go at an art fair.
I think, as I mentioned before, the quality of the artwork really took me by surprise. I don't think that I've seen a, flat out like wall to wall art fair of this scale on this quality since Art Basel in Switzerland, which I think still does have the edge over Art Basel Paris in terms of, the quality of work that's brought. But, this is in the same ballpark at the very least. This was an art fair where, Hauser and Wirth could bring a spider sculpture by the late artist Louise Bourgeois, priced it at $20 million and sell it on the second day. There aren't that many art fairs where you can just confidently bring a $20 million artwork and sell it on the booth on the second day. Likewise, the White Cube Gallery, which also opened space in Paris in the last few years, they brought a major painting by Julian Moretu from 2013. A really incredibly, bold, just exciting, large scale painting. They priced it at 9.5 million and it sold on the first day. These are serious numbers, These are not Frieze London numbers. They're not even Art Basel Miami Beach numbers. These are way closer in line to what you see selling at Art Basel in Switzerland. And this is happening amid what is widely acknowledged to be a sort of softening of the market. I think that there's been a lot more hand-wringing and pearl-clutching in the press than I would like to see. But that being said, it's not quite the boom times that we were seeing in the year after the pandemic or, in the years before then as the market seemed to go higher and higher and higher. But just to reiterate, in Frieze London, people were excited that things were selling in the mid six-figure range, and that was enough to sort of propel, goodwill and a sense of buzz in London. But in Paris, you had works selling for over $1 million by artists such as Victor Mann, Mark Bradford, Barbara Chase Rabeau, Howardina Pindell, Merritt Oppenheim, Jonas Wood, Tom Wesselman, Alice Neal. I mean, this is a lot of artwork that's moving at a very high price point. So I think that it's not to be all optimistic about everything, but like these are just indicators that this fair was successful. I don't know if the market is going to just rebound immediately, but clearly this was a successful fair.
Yeah, I think the fair really proved that there is strong demand for high quality artworks. So in terms of attendance, did Art Basel Paris attract a different crowd compared to, say, Frieze London? Was there a noticeable increase in international visitors to Paris?
There were a ton of Americans at Art Basel Paris. I mean, like you always see a ton of Americans whenever you go to Paris, whatever you do, but it's still remarkable to be at a European art fair and just see that many Americans. At Frieze London, yes, there were a lot of people who came over. Adam, you were there. But it's funny. I went to this event at the U.S. Ambassador's home in London, and when I was in there, that's when I noticed, oh wow, there's a lot of American accents that I'm hearing around me right now. I haven't heard that all day. Whereas in Paris, I heard American accents around me all the time, regardless of where I was. It was just like so many people had come from across the pond because, Paris is just a city that Americans and, just people from, Mexico, Canada, South America, people love coming to Paris. This is just such an easy ask to get, art collecting VIPs or even, wealthy people who are known to the VIP teams at Art Basel who haven't really even started collecting that much. They want to bring these people to Paris and they will come to Paris because it's a city that is flush with incredible hotels, wonderful restaurants, as I said, museums, and you can go to Disneyland if you want. There's all sorts of stuff you can do in Paris that you can't do, certainly in Basel, Switzerland, but kind of anywhere. So I think it's just an easy ask to get people, not just from across the continent and not just from, across the water in England, but you can get people from all over the world to come to Paris. And I think that when the economy improves in China and that region, you'll see a lot more Asian collectors in Paris. This year, I can't say that there were so many, but I think that once the situation sort of changes a little bit, that will also be an enormous factor in Paris. I mean, this is just one of those cities that like everyone always wants to come to, and you can really plan an entire sort of trip to Paris around the fair without it being the one focus for your reason for coming. You go to the art fair, you'll go have a drink somewhere, you'll go to a restaurant that you've been wanting to go your entire life, and then you'll go back to your five-star hotel and everything is wonderful. It just works so well as a city with a world-class art fair.
And so in your article, or at least in the headline, you pose the question, will Art Basel Paris upend the global art fair order? So I think that's alluding to how it may impact things like Frieze London or Art Basel Switzerland. Now that we've had a chance to experience Art Basel Paris in the Grand Palais, what's your takeaway regarding how the fair may impact the art fair order?
Well, Adam, the writer doesn't always write the headline. And upend is a bit of a strong word. That being said, we will start to see some kind of effects, right? You can't just, introduce a, behemoth of an art fair into the ecosystem and expect nothing to happen. I think that you'll start to see the effects in the coming years, right? I mean, I think that inevitably, people who were used to doing, say like collectors who are used to going to a certain number of art fairs per year will start adding Art Basel Paris and inevitably will have to, cut out another fair just because you can't just travel for art fairs, the entire year. Presumably you have another job to do or a family, you just can't just be on the road all the time. Will that mean they cut out Art Basel Miami Beach, which is basically right around the corner, that's a possibility. Will they cut out Basel, Switzerland because they can't get a room at the Trois Bras and they can get a room at Le Maurice in Paris? And that's a way better experience than staying at the Craft in Basel. Maybe, that's a great reason to cut out an art fair for a lot of people who I've talked to. Will it mean just jettisoning London before because you can't do this, 2 week long art jaunt in the middle of a very busy fall? Possibly. But what will happen is I think that now that Art Basel Paris is the new shiny thing, and everyone's agreed that it's a good fair, and it's agreed that you kind of have to be there, undoubtedly other fairs will start to see shifts in attendance from the top VIPs. How will it affect what gallerists do? And whether exhibitors will sort of start cutting out other fairs, we'll see. There were at least one or two major galleries that have in the past done Frieze London who did not do it this year, and they did Art Basel Paris. There's only so many art fairs that these galleries can do and stay afloat. I mean, you can't be in multiple places at once. These galleries also have, some of them, galleries in 3 different cities, in the U.S. and Europe. And so you can't have an opening and do an art fair, blah, 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 blah. You just can't be 2 places at once. So inevitably, we will start to see the effects that Art Basel Paris has on the art fair landscape in general. But this does not mean that Art Basel in Switzerland is going to close. Absolutely not. This does not mean that Frieze London will just shut down. The way that the fair operators are thinking is very much like, oh, we can make this work for me. Like Art Basel Paris is a success. Maybe the rising tide lifts all ships. I think that Basel, rather than trying to pit one fair against another, is very much positioning each of these fairs to attract a certain kind of collector and VIP or even exhibitor. You don't necessarily need to go to all of them. What Basel wants is certain people going to certain fairs, and they each have their own identity and their own reason to exist. And I think that Frieze thinks the same thing. Frieze thinks, look, maybe, you'll do certain buying at Art Basel Paris, or, certain galleries will do that fair. Other galleries will do art fair. Young galleries, I think, did really successfully at Frieze London because there's a certain collector that's going to that fair that's trying to, interact with the vigorous network of young galleries in London that doesn't quite exist in Paris. And also, go on studio visits with some of the most amazing artists in the world who are based in London. That's also not quite the case with Paris. So I think that these fairs operate in different ways and they can coexist. Will things be different? Absolutely. Will there be, some growing pains? Totally. I think that, we will start to see that, and, both the VIPs and the dealers participating in the fairs will also see it. But I think long term, rather than predicting gloom and doom and closed fairs and whatnot, I think that we'll start to settle into a new order where these fairs can actually coexist with each other.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think we'll just keep following along and see how the fair fits in with the other art fairs throughout the calendar year. And before we let you go, Nate, we'd love if you could share a little bit more with our listeners about both your column and your new newsletter that they can sign up for.
Yeah, well, I've been writing this column about the art world, True Colors, for the last 3.5 years since I joined Vanity Fair. But just a few weeks ago, I launched a brand new newsletter that is delivered right to your inbox before it hits the website or goes out anywhere else. All you have to do is sign up. Just Google Nate Freeman, True Colors newsletter, Vanity Fair. You'll find the link to sign up. It's real easy. Put your email address in, and it will come to your inbox every Friday. I've been having a blast doing it. It's really fun. And I think that it's kind of just like the best way to get insight into the craziest that is the global art, landscape. We both love it so much, Adam, and I just want to share that infectious energy with, the people who want to read about it. So sign up online at vanityfair.com.
Perfect. Well, I definitely recommend everyone subscribe to the newsletter. It's a great read, and I love when it lands in my inbox. Nate, thanks so much again for joining us and sharing your invaluable insights on Paris. We really appreciate it.
Anytime, Adam. Anytime.